Mr. Wilson's Airships. The thickest mystery in American aviation history is an almost forgotten but still unexplained episode that began in November 1896 and ended in May the following year. From California to Maine, thousands of Americans reported sightings of large airships unlike any object that could fly in those days, several years before the Wright brothers, enabling the flight of heavier-than-air bodies, changed history forever. The airships aroused wonder and speculation about the identity of their inventor, assuming it was one. To this day no one knows the name. All we have are a few deceptive hints, the most suggestive of which concerns a very strange man named Wilson. Mr. Wilson appeared on the scene on April 19, 1897. A young man from Lake Charles, Louisiana, was leading a parade of horses when he saw a huge aircraft pass overhead, which so frightened the animals that they bolted and threw him to the ground. At this point the airship stopped and remained suspended motionless in the air. The ability to stop in flight was one of the then inconceivable performances of that mysterious vehicle, while a rope ladder was lowered. Two of the occupants of the airship descended and helped the witness up. It was certainly comforting to find that they were simple, ordinary Americans like me, the young man would later report. The airmen offered an apology for the accident they had caused. To compensate the young man, they invited him on board and introduced themselves by the names of Scott Warren and Mr. Wilson. The latter said he was the owner of the vehicle. On board it, Wilson and Warren explained its propulsion system, but the description was so technical that the young man did not understand it. The next day, near Uvalde, Texas, an airship landed and was discovered by Sheriff H. W. Baylor, who conversed with some of the crew members. One of them said his name was Wilson and that he was born in Goshen, New York State, and then asked for Captain C. Akers, a local resident. Later, Akers told a reporter, "I can assure you that when I lived in Fort Worth in 76 and 77 I knew a man named Wilson well who was from upstate New York. We were close friends. He had a knack for mechanics and was working on air navigation and something that would astound the world. Gifted with an excellent education, he was then 24 years old. He seemed to have money with which to run his inventions, devoting all his time to them. Based on the conversations we had when I was staying in Fort Worth, I believe that Mr. Wilson, if he had succeeded in building a working airship, would probably have come looking for me to show me that he was not as exaggerated and curmudgeonly in his claims as I then thought." The airship reappeared a day or two later when it landed for repairs in Council, Texas. Witnesses spoke to the pilots, who said their names were Wilson and Jackson. On the 25th of the same month, between midnight and 1 a.m. As the San Antonio Daily Express announced the next day, the sky was very cloudy and not a single star was visible. This made the splendor of the white light produced by the airship's headlights and the diffused brightness emanating from them stand out even more. It prevented a view of the structure, however, but as the object, circling around, got closer, at least a dozen lower lights, including a group of green lights on the side of the airship facing the city, and another immense grouping of red lights aft, clearly indicated that it was an artificial object. The paper went on to say, without explaining how it learned of it, that the inventors were Hiram Wilson, of New York, son of Willard W. Wilson, chief mechanic of the New York Central Railroad, and electrical engineer C. J. Walsh of San Francisco. The two men had been working for several years on their project, and when it was finalized they had the different parts of the airship built at different places in the country, from which they were shipped to the rendezvous point in San Francisco and assembled on the island. The Daily Express stated that the airship, after being tested in California, flew to Utah and was hidden, somewhere out of the way in the western part of the country, to be perfected there. It then resumed its flight eastward across the United States, after which no more was heard of Wilson and his miraculous machine. Who was Mr. Wilson? Research conducted in recent years has come up empty. And a study of airship sightings since 1897 give us reason to suspect that Wilson was even more mysterious than his early appearances might suggest. According to writer Daniel Cohen, author of the book The Mystery of the Great Airship, there is much about this Wilson episode that is puzzling and contradictory. Every attempt to reconstruct the route of Wilson's airship through South Texas during the last week or two of April 1897 proved hopeless. Airships seemed to pop up all over the place. There would have had to be at least 2 or perhaps 3 different ones all traveling along extremely capricious routes to account for all the sightings and encounters. Apart from the name Wilson, which appears in at least 5 separate reports, the names of the other crew members vary. So does their number, which ranges from 2 to 8. And although many reports claim that the inventor announced that he would shortly put his airship into the public domain, he never did so. Another researcher, Jerome Clark, noted something even stranger. We are faced with a simply impossible fact that in itself is sufficient to raise profound questions about the present role of Wilson, Clark observed. Notably, Captain Akers states that 20 years before Wilson's appearance in Uvalde he was 24 years old. In Lake Charles, in 1897, he is described as an apparently young man. Even today, even with our increase in average lifespan, a 45-year-old is never called young except in the most relative sense of the term. 8 years ago he should long ago have been in so-called middle age. Some scholars have speculated that the episode was not what it had seemed. The airships and their occupants, mostly human in appearance, were not American inventors who inexplicably never came forward to claim the reward for their efforts, but instead the products of an enigmatic alien intelligence, who tried to disguise themselves by wearing clothes that the American culture of the time could accept. This is a fanciful explanation, and we have no way, nearly a century later, of knowing whether it corresponds to the truth or not. We can only be certain that the mysterious Mr. Wilson and the strange airships associated with his appearance will remain an enigma.